Thank you. And timer is set. So thank you everyone for joining us. We really appreciate it. And thank you to our panelists. We appreciate their time, their insights, and their perspective. And we're looking forward to a lively discussion. Rainer and I are paneling, are chairing just as was just said. And Evonne Sepsis, I am with ESC Advisors. We're a boutique investment bank. And what we plan on doing today is going through and having everyone talk about cell and gene therapy. And they're going to give a little bit of their background and highlights of we have interesting combination of a manufacturer, a company, and a fund. So I think it'll be a very lively discussion. And Rainer, over to you for intros.
Yeah, also from my side, a very warm welcome to this panel discussion. My name is Rainer Strohmenger. I'm a managing partner at Wellington Partners based in Munich. We are a venture capital firm focusing on life science investments, based in Germany, in Munich, with about 600 million euros under management, and currently investing out of our sixth fund generation. About half of what we do is in the therapeutics field. That also includes cell-based therapies, gene therapies, also up to organ transplantation, xenotransplantation, where I'm a strong believer in. And I think it's very exciting to observe how this entire field is developing. I think we've recently seen just a number of very exciting clinical news flow, and very, very happy to again chair this panel or co-chair this. And now over to the panelists to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit more about what they're doing. So, Alberto, please.
Very happy to do so. Sounds like working. So Alberto Santagostino, I'm the head of Cell and Gene Technologies business unit in Lonza. You may know Lonza is organized as a proper engineering firm. Every modality there is a person managing it, and my responsibility is around everything related to viruses, cell, iPSCs, and exosome, and all the things relevant to a little bit these new modalities. We are CDMOs, so we do manufacturing and development on behalf of the companies that are going to be our clients. And I like to see ourselves as the highway to take the products the company developed from preclinical to commercial, taking care of the totality of the technical development. So fundamentally a service provider. And as of today, we are probably the largest in size CDMOs in the cell and gene technology space. So very happy to be on this panel and bringing probably the perspective on the technical development side and about how to make sure to get drugs on the market in an effective manner. Thank you.
Hi there, I'm Alex Blyth. I'm the founder and CEO of Blyth BioSciences. Blyth is a unique cell therapy company. We have the world's only neutrophil-based cell therapy. And we recently had very good results on successfully being able to now produce from iPSCs and getting multiple times the killing and recruitment of immune cells into any solid tumor with adding CARs. So we've had a lot of license activity. We're just closing out our Series A. But I'll be speaking here very much just on behalf of companies at a similar stage and trying to represent those views.
Good afternoon. My name is Carolin Barth, and I'm a partner director at the Boston Consulting Group, a top management strategy consulting company that most of you probably know globally, and I'm in the Zurich office. I lead some of our activities in the R&D sector, namely in the cell therapy space. I have just recently joined actually BCG. Prior to that, I was CEO of a biotech company in the UK, which we successfully transacted last year to Gilead in the fall. And prior to that, I was heading up cell therapies at Novartis in regards to the research, development, technical manufacturing, as well as manufacturing part of it. So bring some perspective to it.
Hi, hello everybody. My name is Giovanni Rizzo. I'm partner of Indaco Venture Partners, which is a venture fund from Italy. And we have 100 million under management with 6 funds. and we invest at the moment only in therapeutics. And we made a few investments in gene and cell therapy. And in Italy, we have a kind of a tradition on gene and cell therapy because there are kind of hospitals that they were front runners in the field. And we look at, quite interesting in our idea. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Stéphane Degove. I'm the CEO of Atamyo Therapeutics. We are a clinical stage gene therapy company. More specifically, we do gene replacement through AVs, and we target muscular dystrophies, and we have clinical stage assets in a family of disease called limb-girdle muscular dystrophy, LGMDs. And we also have a very exciting program in cardiomyopathies, and more specifically, we develop new vectors that have incorporate technologies that improve significantly the safety and efficacy of gene therapy. I'm happy to be here to discuss with you the field.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for the introductions. I think what we'll do is start with some questions on our side and direct them to individuals, but we want to have a lively debate, so anyone, please jump in. But maybe we'll start with something that's top of mind to, I'm sure, the audience members, as well as to everyone sitting up here, is financing. And we're dealing in a field that's ever evolving. Some may say it's maturing, but it's made great strides. And the question I would ask, starting with the companies, is what do you think the issues are as it relates to financing? And how are those issues surmountable?
Okay, that starts with this one. Okay. Well, I think, the financing environment obviously has got tougher. I think we imagine a pressure cooker and the lid going down. And if anyone remembers Boyle's law, if you want to increase pressure, you halve the volume. And, the volume of money supply has been more than halved. And, I think that increases pressure on biotechs to look at more collaborations and partnerships, which I think can be a good thing, not thinking you're going to do it all on your own. And making more money out of doing licensing deals. That's certainly the way we've moved. But I think one of the conundrums for me when I'm looking in, trying to be objective, is venture capital came in strongly about 30 years ago, and the idea was that pharma was needing to see clinical data in order to back companies early, and that pharma therefore agreed with these VCs coming in, and they would support earlier companies to get them to the stage where they can hand them over to pharma. What I find peculiar in the current environment is I have pharma companies working with me when we are just going into the clinic, and they have a lower bar now, actually, than the VCs who are requiring you to have clinical data. And it's like they've sort of jumped out of where they were playing onto the other side of the pharma companies. And I do think that I understand why that's happening, but at the same time, it does leave a gap.
Okay, so in terms of gene replacement, it's been quite a roller coaster. When we created Atamyo late 2020, we were in the middle of a kind of bubble in terms of valuation, IPOs of preclinical companies with 500 million valuations, pre-IPO. Everything burst, so it was a mix of the financial environment with the increase of interest rates, but also in 21, 22, many clinical holds due to safety issues, because I believe there was a not well mastering of the safety profile, how to use gene therapy, still many ways to improve the vectors and the manufacturing, the quality of manufacturing. But now it's much better because we had we have a series of approvals. So despite all these challenges, there was 2 gene replacement therapies approved in hemophilia late 22, early 23. First gene therapy approved for muscular dystrophy, Sarepta for Duchenne. So I think it's much better now. Of course, for any biotech, raising funds is more complicated for the last 12 months than in 2021. And in terms of partnering, what I can see, because it's, as a CEO, we always have to think about alternative to VCs, is indeed partnering, interesting partnering. it's the word is a bit cut into a pharma. That some pharma decided not to hear again about gene therapy. That publicly announced that we stop. Just Takeda, Pfizer also has cut a lot of programs. But other pharmas are active in the fields, in the therapeutic fields, or they believe in the potential, because gene therapy, gene replacement has a huge potential to cure disease. With one single administration, you can have potentially lifelong efficacy. And also pharma, we are having interesting discussions about pharma that see that there is a huge improvement in the vectors. We are improving efficacy not by 30%, but by 10, 100, 1,000 times using new vectors. We are also now we understand how to avoid most of the safety issues. So there are pharma interested in working with us to prepare the gene therapy that will enter clinical trials in 2, 3, 5 years' time. So no, it's much better now than 1 year ago.
Well, I can put a perspective that probably will be somewhat different than the one from the therapeutic, but hopefully helpful. First of all, I am very positive about the future, simply because the level of efficacy that cell and gene has demonstrated and will bring to the table of the therapeutic opportunities is just so incredible. Kind of we cure diseases that there is no future possible, in my view, without cell and gene therapy. So, okay, there is turbulence, but long term, there is no doubt that this is going to be a more than viable modality with a very successful future in terms of growth, sales, and disease treated and cure. Now, we move from an irrational optimism to now a period of irrational pessimism, and I expect that in 1 year, maximum 2, we will get to a new normal of rational behavior, where, I mean, it's risky, but it has high returns, and therefore you need to do just good rational choices. So what I would say is that probably now we will observe a period in which a few companies will not make it, but I expect that as a whole the industry will progress, and the good science will probably find good money. It will be unlikely people will be able to raise millions on a PowerPoint presentation, but I will struggle to believe that if there is really compelling data, people will not have in their financing. Just a final consideration about how an organization like mine can contribute around the financing aspect. So if you consider about where a small company spends money, one of the probably less rational aspect where to spend it is deploying capital, CapEx, into infrastructure, manufacturing facilities, and equipment. Also, not so much so because of the CapEx, but because then you bind yourself into an OpEx structure where you need to have, I don't know, 50, 100 people in the manufacturing that every month you need to pay. And that is just practically impossible to be sustained by any smaller organization. So all in all, despite at face value, the cost per batch might be higher, but the level of de-risking and capital deployment avoidance that can be achieved going with the CDMOs is just probably the only real viable choice at early stages. It's not only about CapEx and OpEx avoidance, but it's also about avoiding technical mistakes in the CMC technical development. If you think about players like even BioMarine or other ones that has run into CMC technical error that are normal for someone that is doing things for the first time, these are very expensive in terms of delay and redoing things. So working with a partner that knows how to do things in a technically correct way from a CMC technical perspective, it helps to de-risk the problem and reduce expensive mistakes. So those are the two aspects that maybe could be relevant in terms of helping in a cash-constrained environment. So avoiding CapEx, avoiding mistakes, having a journey toward commercialization that is not fast, but is at pace, respecting all the things that are needed without having hiccups. And in this case, I feel like my organization can probably provide that in a good way, having commercialized already 3 products in cell and gene technologies, and probably commercializing, if everything goes fine, other 8 by the end of next year. So that's, we believe, is a big value proposition forward.
That's very impressive. And maybe, Giovanni, you can also share with us your view from an investor perspective about the area and why you think investments in this field make sense and are attractive.
Yeah, so apart from the fact about the efficacy, what I would to add, there are two things actually that has been already discussed. One is the cost. So basically, you know that the gene and cell therapy is very expensive today. I agree on what has been said before, but on the other side, keeping a little process of manufacturing inside, it maybe can help on small scale to change the production of the new virus, if you want to say, new plasmids. So it's when you are very close to the lab, then you can find the strategies to make all the process which is less expensive. So that's actually one point. And recently there are a lot of companies that are trying, especially in gene therapy, to try to reduce the cost just for the manufacturing and all the process, which is one of the pitfall of small companies, because at the end of the story, still, if the therapy is too high in price, it will have difficulties to get the market. There is another thing on the cell therapy. I forgot. Sorry for that. I was thinking something, but I just lost the. It was something about cell therapy. It will come on my mind. But the prospect of an investor, no, actually, that's what I want to say, that in the process, if you think about the process of cell therapy, there is still a lot missing there in terms of the process to produce the cell therapy. Still, a lot of this work is done in the hospitals. The therapy should be delivered in the hospital. So there are a lot of companies that are trying actually to tackle this process, which will reduce, I think, significantly the price of the production. And this is very important. So considering that there is a good efficacy, consider that in the future, I think the cost of the production will be reduced significantly. I think it's actually a good space where to invest. Of course, there are the challenges, which is what kind of vector in terms of gene therapy you are going to use, A, B. Now there is the lenti that are coming as well. So I think there is a lot that is going on, and it's a good space that's what we believe.
Carolin, maybe you can touch upon what both Alberto and Giovanni mentioned in terms of pricing and how we look at the world of both pricing and payers and all the variables that go into kind of that decision-making process, thinking about the bookends of once and done to kind of chronic, right? And how do we think about pricing in this rather complicated but emerging and very exciting field?
So yeah, I mean, it's definitely a super exciting field, and I think, you know, there have always been a couple of companies that have charted the way respectively, although most of them have been more of the large pharma companies that have had the capital capabilities to bring those products, especially on the cell side, to market respectively. I think what we're seeing right now is definitely an interesting way how it really becomes a sandwich position right now that we're seeing for cell therapies as well as gene therapies companies to happen in the way that, you know, on the one side with inflation rates and rates for any kind of lab equipment and so going up tremendously, and at the same time you have the pricing pressure coming down as well from the other end in terms of IRA is probably not going to hit this space right up front, but nevertheless, you know, the willingness of the healthcare systems to pay for high price therapies, albeit the fact that, as you mentioned before, Stéphane, they can be a one-time life-saving therapy. We do see that overall that becomes a real challenge, and I mean, obviously we're not only serving biotech clients, but also payer clients respectively. You know, they are bringing that forward and saying that that's a real issue for them going forward. So what does that mean for the cell therapy space? I think it really is incredibly important early on to define, okay, what's your value proposition going to be so that the healthcare system is going to be willing to pay respectively the respective price that you need to achieve. And coming back to what you just said, because the manufacturing is expensive. I mean, I think, in the autologous space, it's more so than if we look in cell therapy and we look in terms of, whether it's allo, iPSC derived, the price point's different. So I think that has to be factored in, but you need to generate the respective margin. So.
Could I chime in on the back of that? I think cell therapy is at a very interesting point. And, when you look back at antibodies, and they had a few mishaps at the beginning, and in particular, they struggled with something obviously very similar to that which we hear in cell therapies, which is how do you bring the cost down without it being massively scalable? And of course, there was the problem where they were using a polysynthetic approach back then, and then they did a hybrid approach where they combined it with a naturally occurring antibody with a synthetic, and that became the modern antibodies of today, and the prices are so low now, very profitable field. And I really feel like cell and gene is going through a similar transition, and iPSCs are the way forward. I think there's no doubt about that. People had some doubts on if it can be done. Well, we're doing it really, really well, so I can tell you it can be done. I think prices we're benefiting because this was a bit of a gold rush at the beginning, and companies, to their credit, like Lonza, Fuji, for us, the Catapult in London, they invested heavily because it was seen as a high profit area in scaling up these technologies. And they have beautiful iPSC cell lines that I can now just go and pick off the shelf with them and test which one works best for producing my therapy, which in my original plan 2 years ago was going to cost me a whole slug of money and was going to take me another 2 years to get to. And they've shaved that all off for me. And so they've actually meant that when I get to patients, it's going to be that much cheaper, depending on what sort of deal you're offering, by the way. I think that's a massive benefit of the fact we had this boom time, that we built up this capability. And now, funnily enough, now it's sort of cranked down a bit. Suppliers as well are becoming more reasonable in what they're offering. And so we're all sort of pulling together, I think, to get through this. And I think to your very good point, when it comes back to balance, we'll be all the better for it.
Expand on something that you said when we were prepping. You talked about how do we define best practices, right? So maybe others can comment on this, but how do we start to define best practices in this field? Can you comment a little?
Oh, well, I'm a little bit controversial here because I'm a biologist economist, so you have to excuse my views. But for me, the point is we're coming up with curative therapies here. I wouldn't be doing what I was doing if I didn't solemnly believe what we had was going to be curative in solid tumours. I'd pack up my bags and go. But I think, that means a health system needs to be able to pay for those. And, we need to be fair to health systems and make this affordable. And I think it's tragic that some very good CAR T therapies cost £250,000 a patient. That's a bit tragic. And I think the way to get these things paid for needs to be looked at very differently and not just theorized. But I would go with an approach where we'd actually do disease-free days. So it's a bit controversial, but basically when you treat a patient and you say it's curative, you stick to your guns. And, that could be, there's some 5-year models that have been looked at. But basically, if over that time of 5 years, the cancer comes back, well, that wasn't a curative therapy. And that means if you've been getting money for that and it's been spread out as payments, you need to come up and treat that patient again and get them back to being disease-free. And you should take that externality and internalize it. And I think if that was baked into the pricing discussions, we were actually taking responsibility rather than talking about the idea of taking responsibility and then just trying to get as much money as possible up front. I think we'd be treated very differently by health systems and we could properly make this all work for everybody.
Pricing, of course, is a very important topic, and there is no doubt that there will be a lot of pressure on the pricing, with especially when we will see, hopefully, increasing volumes of these therapies to be used. And Alberto, my question to you would be, how can you contribute to lower manufacturing cost? What kind of agreements can small companies do with your organization in order to align interest, yeah, as volumes go up? Obviously, there will be some scale effects, hopefully, and so in order to make everything workable, ultimately. Maybe you can...
No, thank you very much for the question, Rainer. Even if I was already spoke a little bit by Giovanni, because on the cost question, he was totally right, and absolutely inspired by Alex, because he gave half of the answer. But let me just pull it together for all of us. So, beside the fact that I believe that the emergency now is about preserving capital for the small organization and less so having a target of cost, because it's going to happen exactly what you said. And I am pretty fresh on those numbers because I've been working also on the monoclonal antibodies. 15 years ago, the price of 1 gram of monoclonal antibodies was $250,000. The cost of 1 gram of monoclonal antibodies today is $100. So is 2,500 times cheaper. Now, the technological journey will be the same in cell and gene technologies, period, I'm certain. And there are 3 dimensions that contribute to this: the cost of raw materials, the cost of running operation, and the most important, the technological evolution. The example that you have given you are around technological evolutions, and I tell you already things that, for instance, Lonza is working on to help this aspect. You might search on internet for something that is called Cocoon. Cocoon is a self-contained box that will allow to do a CAR T probably in optimal structure at the cost of $50,000, because you eliminate the people, you eliminate the mistake of the people, you eliminate the dirt that people brings, you reduce and simplify all the raw materials that you need to put in, and you have sort of an industrialized manufacturing system. Another example of technology we are working on is producer cell line, both for AAVs and lenti. Once you have a producer cell line, forget about the plasmid, the cell does it itself. Forget about a lot of the cytokines that you need to do, or the helper viruses and all those things. You have your producer cell line that is produced like it's produced today, a CHO cell line to do monoclonal antibodies. You throw them in a bioreactor and you start to produce them. And if you are really good at that, we are going to be able to do that as a perfusion system. So you have a kind of a sort of a pumping reactor that is going to leak out your viruses. So in terms of getting to the right cost point, technology-wise, there are already solutions in the works today, like iPSC off the shelf. And therefore, I'm fairly confident on that aspect. In terms of partnering and contracting approaches to help customer, the way that we say is that we try to split the world in 2 halves: before commercialization and after commercialization. When companies come to me and ask me, what's your cost per batch when you are in a clinical stage, I tell them, you are asking me the wrong question. The question you need to ask me is, how much is going to cost me the technical development up until commercialization? Because if the cost per 1 batch is 100K or 1 million, the important element is knowing what is the total budget you need to put into getting to commercialization. And if you do the number today, considering the small number of patients, developing from a technical standpoint a cell and gene technologies cost less than doing a broader indication on biologics, let it be only on chemicals. So the cost of a technical clinical development is already cheaper today than it is with other modalities. The right question on the per patient cost is after commercialization, because then is where it really matters. There is no company that will survive with a COGS structure that is higher than 33%. So to go back to the question, what we are doing is that we get into contracts or agreement with our customer that we take a risk-sharing approach in which we guarantee a 33% COGS or 25 or target COGS structure to the company that works with us. This is because if on the part before commercialization you are working out of a budget, that is what you have been doing as a capital rise, and so you need to understand if what Lonza asks you is compatible with your capital rise. After you commercialize, you're going to be paid and you need to make profit on every given patient that you make. And so you want to have a guarantee on the cost from manufacturing. And that's what we are working on. And I would say that your golden number is that your COGS need to be below 33. If you are below 33, you're good, because 33 will pay for your marketing and R&D, and 33 is your profit. That's my view.
So if I come to you with a lower price point, you drop your costs?
We work together to make that happen.
Ah.
For instance, it goes going to be technical or it's going to be operation. If you come to me with a process that is 14 hours, you're basically telling me I can do a batch per day. If you allow my process development to take it from 14 to 10 hours, I can do 2 batches per day. So my cost of depreciation of a clean room and people goes to half, and I give it to you. I'm happy to do so.
Okay, everyone heard it here, right? Okay.
Stéphane, maybe.
Yeah. So
Oh, yeah, go
there are
ahead.
many aspects about the pricing. I agree with Carolin. There's a huge challenge because indeed you can about the system, the reimbursement, the reinventing the reimbursement system, as indeed gene therapy can add tremendous value. You can prevent decades for patients of being disabilitated. You can prevent death. So the value is tremendous in millions of euros. The system could afford treating in a country 10,000 patients with a reimbursement price of 1 million, 2 million. But the big challenge for me is that we are developing tools that could now address larger indications, but the system is not going to be able to reimburse hundreds of thousands of euros per patient. For example, with one treatment, you cure diabetes, but the system is not going to be able to. So the challenge indeed is to improve so that there is new modalities. So there are efforts. For example, in Europe, there is a guidance where payers will accept to pay high prices with 5 years follow-up to prove that your treatment is at least 5 years efficient. But it's only one aspect of the answer. Then, indeed, manufacturing is important for gene replacement. For example, we inject patients for systemic administration, not telling about injecting small doses in the eye or in the ear. We are injecting 10,000 or 100,000 times more than, for example, classic vaccines for COVID. It has a manufacturing cost. In order to be able to re-educate all the cells, when you speak about muscular dystrophy, you need to cure all the muscles. So there is, and I think, yeah, of course, there will be improvement. There are improvements in terms of the yields of manufacturing, so I'm sure that we will be able to reduce. Another way is simply to improve the efficacy by 100,000 times. If you have to inject 1,000 times less to have the same efficacy, you cut the manufacturing cost. But it's true that when I speak with other gene therapy companies, especially on the other side of the Atlantic, they are in these. They are not focused very much on manufacturing costs because they live in this rare disease when they know they will be able to charge their drug at $3 million. And they will have, I'm sure it's very taboo, but I'm sure that they're having 6 figures manufacturing cost per patient. So it's true that here in Europe, we are more educated with think about the system is more asks more about the cost, and I'm sure that in Europe we are more moving forward in the term of improving manufacturing costs, and we are well placed on that. And you had a question about the bar, the standards. I spent 8 years before Atamyo in monoclonal antibodies, and I was a bit when I saw how the manufacturing was done. So there was no guideline. So I was quite, for example, monoclonal antibody. You inject a patient, you need to have 98% purity. The first approved gene therapy, there is the full capsid ratio. This is a standard that we use. So it means when you inject, you have a batch. How percentage of the batch contains the full length of the genome. So treatments that have been approved in the recent years sometimes had as less as 25-30% full capsid ratio, meaning you're injecting to a patient 2 times more, something that you don't master very well. But it's moving forward, and I think taking advantage of what has been achieved with monoclonal antibodies, we know what is the roadmap to bring the standards of manufacturing, the quality of gene and cell therapy to the same standard that are. But what is good is that the health authorities, for example, we've just been cleared by the FDA. They are open and they are very constructive in improving and letting you conducting clinical trials and giving you advice how to get to the quality that is requested for market approval. So it's very constructive, especially with the FDA, because there is more know-how also. More know-how, while in Europe, for example, in some countries, they don't understand really how to manufacture, what is the quality that is requested for a clinical batch or for a commercial batch. So it's always improving, and we are with like maybe monoclonal antibodies in the 90s when we started to the first batches, and now we are evolving quickly, so it's positive, and we will tackle the manufacturing cost, I'm sure.
Yeah, if I can add a couple of thinking about this discussion. So one is about the production. So basically, going back to Lonza, sorry if I take you on board all the time, but one point is the plasticity, actually, that you can provide to the startups, meaning, going back to the point of Rainer before, so what is your plan to help startup to get that plasticity that you need actually to reduce the cost, which is not only manufacturing cost, but how can you change the process? How can you improve the efficacy? And this is not just production. It's, trying to make something different, which is more that has more efficacy. So how do you plan to help startups to do that? Because actually this is an important point, which is the plasticity. And why I make this case, you know that Orchard recently just gave back to the Teleton, which is an Italian charity program for immunodeficiency, a very rare disease for immunodeficiency. And now the charity, it's providing the therapy to the patients. Because Orchard, why did dismiss the program? Because it was not sustainable. So at the end of the story, it's not, I agree that is the regulatory part is important. They give you, good advice to go ahead in the clinical trial, but then at the end of the story is the business. So if the pharma doesn't have the business behind, they disconnect the process. And then what is going to happen? That's why the pricing is really important with the reimbursement and everything. And that's why I mean helping companies that are developing cell and gene therapy with something from the CDMO that can help to increase the efficacy at the beginning, which could be really important. So that's actually something that we need to think about as well.
Can I just maybe add one thing? The way cell therapies have been developed in the past, and also gene therapies, as we've been talking about here, it's been a lot in the rare disease space, obviously. So the whole part around pressure on manufacturing costs as well as scalability just wasn't there. You had to a certain degree the luxury, no matter what, it's going to cost 100 or 120 or 150,000, so what, I can charge whatever I need. I think as we're now moving into this field where we're seeing so much more applicability of cell therapies, whether it's in gene therapies, whether it's in the field of, let's say, immunology, I think there are currently, when I looked it up yesterday, it was 19 trials for SLE with cell therapies. So lupus, I mean, it's exploding the field, and these are much bigger numbers in terms of patients. So it has to be, there is an automatic pressure on the system to reduce the manufacturing costs and or change the manufacturing technology, which is exactly where you come in, Alex, or other companies, whether it's going then, an autologous system is just going to be really difficult to work in that setup. So in the end, we'll probably move to something like an allo or an in vivo. I think there are many things coming, but if we truly want to treat larger patient populations, it needs that step change. It's not going to be just tweaking here and there, and then we're going to make it happen.
Yeah, just coming in off that, I think the big change, moving into cell and gene has been the cost of getting to GMP, and it's a real hurdle where, the first big cost hurdle say a small molecule used to be the clinical trial. And so, that's why it's so tricky, I think, to bring things through to clinic, because the costs have been so high. But I do see a rosier future where, the cost of, you outsourcing your production to providers who are becoming more reasonably priced and not just premium pricing everything so much now, could mean you don't need to raise as much money as you might have done 2 years ago. I mean, I remember 4 years ago, everyone thought you had to build your own production plant. And I can tell you where I am in Imperial and White City, there's lots of sort of dinosaurs from that as like relics of companies who raised a hell of a lot of money and built these pointless sites that quickly got superseded. And, I think we're past that huge sunk cost. And I think that is a really important milestone. And as the Lonzas and so on generously lower their costs, I think this will become more and more possible. And we should get more volumes of cell therapies coming through to enable them to do that profitably as well.
Yeah. Yes, for VC, maybe Rainer, because it's true that for gene therapy, even if you have a developed process to have first GMP batch, most of the time it costs 10 million. And it's difficult to, so I understand about Lonza was saying about what is the global cost for the clinical development before getting commercialization, but just before getting the first patient treated, as you say, Alex, is how can we make this sustainable? Because I don't believe that VC is just in parallel of doing all the IND enabling studies is willing to pay to invest 10 million just to get the first GMP batch in cell and gene therapy. So there is you have to think differently about how to collaborate with a CDMO. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I guess to Giovanni and Rainer, is that a milestone? Getting your GMP, is that a milestone that you'd see as an inflection point, or you really will need to see the clinical trial data? So it's got to be a lot more money invested.
I mean, it's a similar situation if you want to bring a monoclonal antibody into the clinic. You also have a high hurdle. What we see is normally financing rounds need to cover both the GMP manufacturing and the clinical study to come to a proof of concept. I think this is something that investors understand, that this is a package. I think just the manufacturing being covered by a financing round without the ability to then conduct a clinical study is probably difficult and will remain difficult to sell to investors. Now, I mean, it's very encouraging to hearing from Lonza that the overall costs are lower than with a monoclonal antibody. And, I'm always asking myself, and this is a very open question to all of you. I mean, when we look at those products that have already reached the market, my impression is none of them has really yet demonstrated the traction that we all need, in order to justify all the investment dollars that went into this area. And what is your expectation when and in which indication and which kind of modalities will really take us through a breakthrough commercially?
It's true that in gene replacement there is one big success, Zolgen SMA, which is 1.5 or 2 something billion sales per year. But as you say in French, it's the tree that hides the forest. It means that, and indeed, as Giovanni said, there were a lot of disappointments with, for example, the programs for orchard. So we'll see. I think the market is really waiting for the sales of these hemophilia drugs, the first sales of hemophilia. All this gene therapy that has been approved the last 6, 7, 9 last months to see if we can indeed reproduce the success of Zolgensema, because as you say, we need more success, convince everyone that it's a sustainable modality financially.
Well, we didn't take into account all the cancer vaccine, but basically it's a gene therapy. And if you look at the data, the recent data from Biotech and Moderna, it's amazing. So if they are going to confirm those data, it's something that you've never seen before. I mean, 40%, 50% almost of the patients at 2 years, they don't have, they have remission of disease. It's unbelievable, which I think you never saw before. It's quite strong. There is another point that we need to consider is the fact that compared to the small molecules, or maybe also antibodies, especially cell therapy, you need to have a specific intratumoral environment. So, and the majority of the mice model, they don't recapitulate the clinical indication. So, and that's actually something very important because, sometimes you end up that you see data that can never translate in humans. And that's actually increased the failure of the projects. That's another point.
I mean, if we look at the cell space, I think we're seeing some direction. If you look, for example, Carvykti that Johnson Johnson just launched. And here again, we're seeing also they are overrun with actually requests to treat patients, but they're running out of capacity again in terms of producing it. So I think, and that's where we're coming back, how much manufacturing, especially for an autologous product, can you put forward and put in place. So I think that's one of the scalable issues that they're running into. I think, and again, also on this, if we look at liquid tumors, it's not, we should not forget that it's not purely the product itself. Most of these patients need intensive preconditioning therapies as well as post-therapy monitoring, and that's a bottleneck in the system as well. So, if you develop a therapy in the cell space or in the gene space that takes up a lot of resources from a hospital or even potentially outpatient setup, that the systems are just, especially after COVID, the hospitals are really running a tight ship in terms of how much can they cover and how many patients can they ultimately treat. So even if they would love to treat more, they just don't have the personnel. So I think that's just something we should still, it's not purely only about the product, it's also about the surrounding system that allows you to administer the product.
Maybe a comment on this one. I want to reassure everyone that I believe the market is there because, as you just said, there are products out there, cell and gene therapies, which only hurdle is that it's difficult to produce enough. Yeah. And their reimbursement price is more than $500,000. Yeah. So today's market condition, today's pricing allows for successful cell and gene products out there. Now, in total transparency, those companies, most of them have a problem around profitability of those products because then we go into aspects like utilizations or scheduling or kind of definition of the release criteria. There are companies that are producing cell therapies, CAR-Ts, that have defined in a silly way wrong release criteria. And so even if the product is very efficacious and could have been released and treat very efficacy the patients, it happens that 50% of the batches falls outside of these release criteria, and per established rules, you don't get reimbursed on those. So when you start to have 50% of your production that could be good, but you declare it not to be good, and you don't get money for it, then you get into problem of profitability. So positive message is if you have a product that has efficacy, even if it's dirty in terms of safety, and it's not at a perfect cost point, there is a market. Bad news is need to be a little smart on nuances or things as out the edges to be sure that then you are not victim of your own success. But yeah.
Yeah, I'd say just as a pick up on what Giovanni said and also Alberto, but I think my summary of best-in-class approaches should be that we're able to do, on the mouse models point, regulators this year announced they don't need to see these mouse models. And so it should be we can use modern technologies like organoids, tumor on a chip, and even better, these perfusion models, which is like an organ on a life support machine. You've got to see this, where you can actually biopsy it each day to see that you're killing it. And those sort of models should be accepted as things to do raises of. So you can raise enough to do your GMP production and go into clinical trials, and use another provider who brings down the cost of that not building your own facility. Those days are definitely gone. And then being able to run clinical trials with investigators who actually follow a protocol that you think is going to work and don't just go off on a tangent. Because the reason we don't just give it to them normally and do a sponsored study is because that's what we're terrified of. So I think also some help there from doctors would be great.
Well, we have a few minutes left, and it would be great if just we wrap it up with some closing statements and what you see potentially for the future. We can just go down. Alberto?
Well, just to be on the spot, I would just say you should stay extremely optimistic. Doesn't matter if you are a company, if you are an investor, if you are a friendly competitor or anything else. I really strongly believe that there is no other future than cell and gene being successful tomorrow. Humanity simply cannot afford to give up this type of efficacy. And then it will be the usual journey to drive down cost, to increase safety, and to collectively, as an aggregation of companies with different interests, move these to become an increasingly affirmed reality. And everybody will play its own role to do so. As a CDMO, you heard, is mostly about avoiding unnecessary capital expenditure and work together into providing the right technology, avoid mistakes, and drive down the cost structure.
I concur. Many good news coming the next month in terms of approval, incredible clinical trial results, and then, as we all said, it's just now converting this scientific clinical success into commercial success, and everything, all the planets will be aligned for developing this fantastic field.
I'm just positive about the future.
It's an exciting field, absolutely. And I think all of you who are working in the cell and gene field, you're making a real difference for patients. I'm a hematologist myself, so I really care about those patients out there. But I also truly believe that it does need a step change if we truly want to serve these large patient populations. Just trying to tweak it here and there with the current is not going to make it work. So I encourage you to think outside the box, think about new ways how you can truly, also change that patient journey with the modality that you're delivering and developing. So, and then we'll see, I see a very bright future.
So I think my final comment is collaboration brings revolution. And I think we're going to see revolutions happening, but they're only going to happen if we collaborate, be it with suppliers, be it with other companies. Like in our case, I don't want to spend millions of pounds developing cars that people have already developed and sunk into other cell therapy platforms. I can just use them and we all benefit. They get another shot on goal, more revenue. We don't have to spend money on those things. And I see a lot more of that going on. And also, I think VCs play a great role in oiling the wheels, because I'm always amazed how much VCs see that we don't. And, just a little helpful nudge in the right direction of something they know that benefits everybody has been incredibly helpful for us.
So I think we heard a lot of positive thoughts about the area. I think we, of course, we come out of a period, or we are currently in a period where some expectations might have been too high, and they're now reduced to a more conservative level. But people are working on all the issues that, you know, with any kind of innovative approaches come up. And it's, I think it's very encouraging to look at, you know, the combination of very extremely exciting clinical achievements, and there's no doubt about that. I mean, we don't even have to discuss that. There's no disagreement. Yeah, if we want to cure patients, we have to find ways to make it work, and the issues of scalability and production cost will be manageable some way. And we see first signs of products that already show initial traction. That should also encourage all the investors to come back to that area. So thank you very much.